Welcome to Whispers After Dark, the place where the eerie, the unexplained, and the terrifying come to life. The swamps have always been shrouded in mystery and fear. Some say the fog conceals secrets older than the trees, and in the black waters beneath the cypress, something lurks, waiting. Tonight, we bring you Blood Bayou, Disturbing Encounters with the Rougarou, a collection of 3 stories of those who met the beast and barely lived to tell of it. Before we begin, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another night of fear and mystery. Now let's get on with our story. They say Louisiana swamps hold many secrets, but none more feared than the Rougarou, a cursed being that walks the line between man and beast, hunting beneath the cover of darkness. Born from a wicked affliction, it spreads its curse like a disease, leaving those who cross its path forever marked. With glowing red eyes, razor-sharp claws, and an intelligence far beyond any mere animal, the Rougarou is more than just a legend. It's a predator lurking in the mist, waiting for its next victim. Harlon had lived and hunted in the swamps of Louisiana all his life. He knew the bends of the bayou, the places where gators hid, and the trails where deer passed through the thick mist. It was the fall of 1954 when he first found the tracks by the water's edge. Too big for a wolf, too long for a man. Clawed, they sunk deep into the wet earth as if something heavy had passed through. His blood ran cold. He gripped his rifle and pressed on, following the tracks. It was twilight, and the fog had begun to thicken, curling between the cypress trees. The silence was wrong. No insects, no frogs, not even the distant splash of a fish. Then came the growl. Low, rattling, close. The sound stopped Harlon in his tracks, a noise he had heard whispered about his whole life. Rougarou. A wild hog squealed in terror, then silence, followed by a long, guttural howl that sent ice through his veins. Stumbling through the muck, he reached his pirogue and shoved off. The motor sputtered, refusing to start. His hands trembled as he yanked the cord again and again, until finally the engine roared to life and his boat shot forward across the dark waters of the swamp, just as something massive crashed through the brush, closing in fast. Harlon risked a glance back. Eyes burned like embers in the fog. The creature stood at the water's edge, watching, waiting. Then, slowly, it grinned and wiped the blood from its mouth. As it turned and disappeared into the swamp, its deep-clawed tracks in the mud began to change, until only the footprints of a man remained. It was several months before Harlon ventured into the swamp again. Even then, he did so reluctantly. The memory of that night still clung to him. The howl, the burning eyes, the way the thing watched him. He told himself it had to be a trick of the mist, a fever dream born from too many late nights and too many ghost stories. But deep down, he knew better. The swamp was different now, too quiet. No chorus of frogs, no rustling of critters in the underbrush, just the gentle lap of water against the cypress roots. The stillness gnawed at him. As he stepped carefully through the muddy trail, his rifle slung across his back, something cracked in the distance. A branch snapping, Harlon froze. Another sound, low, guttural breathing, close. His heart pounded as he turned, the weight of his rifle suddenly useless in his hands. Something massive exploded from the shadows, a towering figure, standing on 2 legs, its matted fur slick with swamp water, eyes glowing like dying coals. The Rougarou. Harlon fired. The bullet struck, he was sure of it, but the creature barely flinched. Then it lunged. Pain tore through his shoulder as claws ripped flesh, and he crashed into the cold mud. He covered his face, bracing for death, but nothing came. The creature was gone. Heart hammering, Harlon scrambled to his feet, searching desperately for his gun. Then he heard it, the low, guttural growl, close, taunting, delighting in his fear. "Run!" The word pounded in his skull, and he did. Stumbling through the muck, he reached his pirogue. Harlon made it back to town, bloodied and shaking. He never hunted the deep swamp again. Some nights, he swore he heard it outside his cabin, breathing, waiting, and sometimes he saw its tracks. On a hot, humid summer night in 1986, a man named Beau Landry had his first encounter with the Rougarou on a bayou deep in the Louisiana swamps. It wouldn't be his last. Beau had spent his life in the waters, knew their rhythms like the back of his hand. The croak of bullfrogs, the hum of cicadas, the occasional splash of a gator slipping below the surface. But tonight something was off. At first he thought it was a gator, low, moving slow. The bayou was different that night. The air was thick, still. Even the usual night sounds felt distant, like they were pulling away from him. He sat in his boat, lantern flickering, checking his lines when he heard it. A low scrape against the cypress. Not the wind, not an animal, something deliberate. He turned slowly, eyes scanning the dark. Nothing but mist and moonlight on the water. But he felt it, that prickling sensation at the base of his neck. The certainty that something out there, something unseen, was watching. Beau tightened his grip on his rifle, forcing himself to breathe. He wasn't the kind to spook easy. The swamp had its fair share of strange things, but he'd always been able to explain them. This, though? There was no explanation. Minutes passed, the silence stretched, and then, just when he thought he might have imagined it, splash! Not small, not a fish. Something big moving just beyond the fog. Beau didn't wait to find out what. He fired up the motor and took off, the feeling of unseen eyes burning into his back the whole way home. He never spoke of it. His gut told him to leave it alone. A week later, it came looking for him. Beau was out hunting gators when he heard it, a guttural growl. Low, long. Through the mist and cypress, something moved. A figure, half hidden, its shape all wrong. Too thin in places, too thick in others. But the eyes, those burning red eyes locked onto him. Beau's blood turned to ice. He revved his boat motor, backing away fast, but the thing moved with him, loping through the shallow water, too fast, too smooth. Then it stopped. For a moment, the swamp fell silent. Even the insects had gone still. The creature cocked its head, watching him, testing him. Then slowly it lifted one arm and pointed. Not at him, but past him toward the open water. Beau swallowed hard. The air felt heavier, thick like a storm was pressing in. He reached for his shotgun. Then the thing grinned. A mouth too wide, teeth too long. Beau fired. The blast tore through the fog, and for a moment the thing staggered. Then it laughed, a sound that didn't belong in this world. Beau gunned the motor, tearing through the bayou, not stopping until he reached the dock by the house he shared with his brother Waylon. He jumped out, leaving the boat drifting, too shaken to care. The next morning, he told his brother Waylon about the encounter. Together, they walked down to the dock. The boat was tied up. Beau knew he hadn't done it. In the mud, leading from the water, were footprints, massive and clawed. On the dock, beside the boat, were another set of prints. Human, barefoot, and carved deep into the wood, a single word, run. Beau stared at the word carved into the dock. His gut twisted. Waylon exhaled, eyes dark. Without another word, he started walking, not toward the boat, but into the trees. Beau hesitated, unease creeping in. "Where you going?" Beau called. Waylon didn't stop, so Beau followed. The swamp swallowed them, thick with shadows and silence. Then Waylon stopped. Slowly he turned, and Beau saw his eyes burning, red. Cold fear slammed through him. "No," Waylon grinned, the same bloody grin from the night before. "Tried to warn you," he said softly. Beau's breath hitched. The footprints, the laughter, the way it never attacked, it all made sense. Waylon shuddered, his skin rippling, bones stretching, changing. Beau didn't wait to see the rest. He ran, but he never made it out of the swamp that day. In the summer of 2002, Celeste Robichaud inherited her grandfather's small house on a bayou in southern Louisiana. She had been raised there, but left the day she turned 18. Most of her family was gone. She hadn't spoken to her older brother in years. All families have their problems. Some just run deeper than others. Newly divorced and desperate for a fresh start, she made the decision to leave Little Rock, Arkansas, and return to her roots. The next few months were quiet, almost soothing. Celeste spent her days remodeling the house, the steady rhythm of work keeping her mind occupied. At night, she fell asleep to the familiar sounds of water lapping against the dock, a sound that had once been comforting. But as time passed, the silence between those sounds began to feel heavier. The rustling of the cypress trees in the wind carried an edge of something familiar, distant, unsettling. Then came the scratching, and with it, memories she had long buried began to stir. It started small, a faint scritch against her door. Raccoons, she thought, maybe a stray dog. But then she saw the shadows, long hunched, moving unnaturally, and just as quickly they were gone. That night Celeste rummaged through the old chest that had belonged to her grandpa. Shaky hands found the small worn box. Inside, silver gleamed in the dim lamplight. Her heart thumped loudly as her gaze settled on the hunting rifle above the fireplace. A few nights later, she heard the scratching again, this time on the deck. A sniff, a low growl. She crept to the window and saw the eyes, too high for a man, too red. They didn't blink, just stared back before vanishing into the dark. Celeste locked every door and window, but the scratching came again, louder this time, claws scraping against wood. Then the handle rattled. Heart pounding, she grabbed the rifle and opened the small box. Taking out a silver bullet, she slid it into the chamber. She aimed the barrel at the door. Silence. Then came a slow, deep growl that vibrated through the walls. She backed away, her aim steady. The boards on the porch creaked under something heavy. Then the beast slammed against the door, hard enough to rattle the windows. Celeste screamed, firing through the door. A snarl erupted from the other side, then silence as the silver found its mark. Celeste slid slowly to the floor, shaken, weary. Placing the gun on the floor beside her, she leaned back against the seat of a chair and exhaled slowly. She stayed awake until dawn. When she finally stepped outside, her porch was shredded, deep claw marks gouging the wood. A blood trail led off into the woods, disappearing into the bayou. Celeste raised a trembling hand to wipe the tears from her face. "I did what I had to do, brother," she whispered. "I hope you've found peace now, Waylon." She packed what she could and left that day, never looked back. The house, it still stands empty, and deep in the bayou are bones of a man who finally found peace. Truth or legend? The people in these stories aren't real, but the legend of the Rougarou, that is very real. Legends and truth are often hard to separate because every legend begins somewhere with something. Every myth has a beginning. Every whispered tale is born from something. Some say the Rougarou is just a story, a way to keep kids from wandering too deep into the bayou. But those who have seen it know better. It's still out there, watching, waiting, and if you hear the scratching at your door or see the red eyes in the water, you'd best run. Thanks for watching this episode of Whispers After Dark. If you enjoyed this chilling tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think there's truth to the legends? And be sure to join me next time for another eerie journey into the unknown. Until then, stay curious. Stay cautious and beware of the whispers after dark.